Welcome to the Power of Reading, a book review program that discusses the latest Catholic books. A book is a dream you hold in your hand. This program is prepared for Radio Maria Nairobi and presented to you by the Daughters of St. Paul.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome once again to the Power of Reading, a book review program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. I am your host and presenter, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul, and we continue this journey we are making together with books as we introduce to you the important, classical and latest Catholic books. And this program wants to promote and revive the reading culture among us because reading has good and lasting effects on our faith as Christians and in our everyday life. And we see great decline in this age of modern technology, which has changed the way we have access to information. And we may be led to think that books are being overtaken by the modern technology or social media platforms and so many other things that are attracting our attention. But we have to realize that after a few decades of the internet, the written word still stands tall. And even though we may have access to a lot of information through the internet, we realize that there is a special way of learning from books that we cannot achieve through the technology of communication. So this program aims at helping all of us reviving that culture of reading so that we can be able to grow in values, to develop in our faith. And the book, actually, we can say, still remains as one of the best inventions of the human race. What we have invented, among the things we have invented, actually, the written word and the book is one of the best inventions we have made. And today in the Power of Reading program, we shall review the book, The Art of Thinking. The Art of Thinking, and this is on Charts on Logic. And this book, again, is written by one of our authors whom we have already encountered in this program, Mr. Silvano Boruso, who has taught philosophy for a long time, has also had a lot of time with high school students teaching them ethics. So this book is The Art of Thinking. And I think this is a good experience to have this book. I wouldn't say it's one of the easiest books to read, but I can say it's one of the most interesting books to read because it helps us to come from what we call our comfort zones. You know, we have some comfort topics that we like to listen to, we like to read, but the art of thinking is something that is very, very important in our own experience as human beings because God has also created us with the faculty of the intellect. And Mr. Silvano Boruso, in the preface of this book, tells us that one of the handicaps of modern education is to assume, without proof and against the tradition of many years, that the innate ability to think, that naturally God-given ability to think, is the same as the art of thinking systematically. And we realize that when we look at the whole area of thinking, we may not pay much attention to it because it is something that comes to us naturally. It's already a gift that God has given us. As we develop every other gift that God has given us, if you want to sing well, you have to practice singing, you have to enhance your voice. If you even want to be a public speaker, you have also to work on your way of speaking, the way you deliver things, the tone of your voice and such things. Also with the art of thinking, we have a similar experience, even though sometimes this is not obvious to us because as soon as we are of age, we are sent to school where we are supposed to accumulate, to acquire knowledge. But sometimes this does not help us in our ability to think, not just to think in a random way as we think about normal things in life, but also to think a little bit systematically. And this thinking systematically also is very, very important, not just in our everyday life, but also in our experience of life and also even in our experience of faith. Of course, the author says he doesn't want to teach logic because we know that one of the branches of philosophy is logic, and this is the study of systematic thinking, trying to be able to order the way we see things in a proper manner, the way we think about things, the way we analyze things. He says that he actually doesn't want to reduce this book, The Art of Thinking, just into teaching that branch of philosophy that is logic, even though you cannot speak about the art of thinking and be able to take away the whole area of logic. Of course, the principles that are applied in this topic of logic in philosophy are also applied in this book. And he says, actually, he wants to say it's the art of thinking, but it's also a chat on logic, a simple approach, not simplistic, but a simple approach to logic. So here he says, actually, what he does not want to do is to turn this book into a scholarly book, which is out of reach of many people, but he's trying to make this systematic thinking as actually something that should be part of everyone's life. We cannot just say, oh, no, that is for just philosophers. Let them live in their brain and crack their brain. But all of us also, we are invited to think systematically by examining the various experiences that we have, examining the various facts that are presented to us, examining the testimonies that we see, and to be able to make what we call a logical conclusion, which also can help us in living together with other people, in being able especially to pursue the truth. And Jesus himself says, I am the truth. So this art of thinking is also very important because it's also something that does not only help us to live well as human beings, but also something that sends us to have that experience of God himself. So welcome, dear listener, to our program of today in the Power of Reading, when we review this book, The Art of Thinking, Charts on Logic by Mr. Silvano Boruso. Let's take a break as we come and venture into this very, very interesting book. Welcome back to the Power of Reading program, a book review program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. I am your host and presenter, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul. And today, in this book review program, The Power of Reading, we are reviewing the book, The Art of Thinking, Charts on Logic by Mr. Silvano Boruso. Now, this book that we are reviewing today is a book that is divided into 3 parts, and it's made up of 14 chapters. So it's not a very, very big book. Let's just have a little overview of all the topics that Mr. Silvano Boruso has presented to us in this book, The Art of Thinking. In part 1, where he has just 1 chapter, he deals with what we call the raw materials of factual knowledge. Remember, thinking is something that also deals a lot with the whole area of knowledge, acquiring knowledge, having knowledge about certain things. And here he deals with 2 points. One is observation and testimony. Of course, when we are acquiring knowledge, also there is another area that we are supposed to look at, but he doesn't pay attention to that. As I present that first part, I will also mention it, because it's not just observation and testimony. There is also that proofing of what you see, but not all of us, and not everything that we do we can be able to prove. We cannot be able to tell the chemical combination of certain liquids, but there are people who are able to do that, and that's why sometimes we have what we call the bureaus of standards in the countries, which if somebody writes a product is made up of 10 ingredients, those people should be able to check for all the citizens that these ingredients are there. And if those ingredients are not there, then it means that that person has breached that common agreement, that common knowledge. So not every one of us can acquire knowledge in that way. But we have also what we call collective knowledge. Then part 2, he deals with what we call assembling the building blocks. Here he has 6 chapters. First is the linkages, types of truths, understanding oneself. He also deals with the whole area of language. Remember, also language is part of our thinking. The way we experience life also develops our language. And we shall also see what that means, and you can also find that in the book. Then there's also the power of proof, and of course in chapter 8 he deals with food for thought. In part 3 he talks about advanced thinking, and this is wisdom. He says actually where we are trying to head to in this quest of ours in understanding the art of thinking is actually to acquire what we call wisdom. And he talks about how do we deal with falsehood. He has certain definitions that he wants us to deal with, the divisions of the areas of wisdom, thinking tools, opposition and composition when we have to discuss a certain issue, and proposition and syllogisms. These are also areas that we find in the area of logic in philosophy. So this is how this book is divided into 14 chapters. And when you look at the introduction that Mr. Silvano Boruso writes here, he says that thinking is like a well-constructed building consisting of foundations which support visible structures in a functional order. As in a building, the foundations are invisible but solid, lest the whole superstructure collapse into a rubble. And a building also has certain amount of decoration, not to be confused with the load bearing the framework. So also when we are looking at the art of thinking, it's something like somehow that gives us a bit of our personality, a bit of who we are, a sense of who we are. Because if we don't have that grounded personal knowledge of issues and facts and being able to analyze them, at least in some logical manner, then we might be a beautiful building without a foundation. We might be so decorated, so handsome, so beautiful, and whatever else that everyone else is outside. Then when they speak to us, what comes from the wells of our knowledge may surprise so many people. So the first image that he gives us to help us understand the art of thinking is to understand it as a foundation that we give to our own self, to our life. He says that the knowledge of facts, necessarily multiple and varied, is the raw material of thinking. Where do we find what we think about? And of course, we acquire this raw material, what we call knowledge of facts. We acquire it, most of it, in our childhood. And we are told by psychologists that the first 5 years of our lives actually determine who we are supposed to be. And this is also a very important fact that helps us to understand, especially the role of parents, the role of caregivers at this early age. Whatever the child is instilled with might determine how they are going to live the rest of their lives. Of course, there's a lot of knowledge that is acquired in and out of school. We spend so much time of our childhood, adolescence, and youth in school, so we acquire a lot of knowledge. Again, these formative years are very, very important. And of course, as life goes on, we continue to pick a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience here and there. Actually, he says that systematic thinking begins with understanding. And this is very rare but very precious commodity, because understanding is even more important than just having facts. And This is actually sometimes the challenge that we have with the type of education that we receive, because the school textbooks pack our memories with a lot of facts, but they provide very little understanding. Most of us actually go through a kind of education that teaches us to memorize things because we're expecting to sit for an exam at the end of all that. Now, what he tells us, we have to distinguish, what does it mean? Knowledge of facts and understanding. Now, he says that there is a difference, because when you have knowledge, you can have knowledge of facts that you don't have experience about. And he says understanding is the ability to see connections both between one fact and another, and between facts and real life. And sometimes that's why we go to school and maybe we even pass very well our exams, our college courses, our university courses. Then when we come to encounter life, we find these two experiences sometimes not going on very well. There is a kind of disparity. And this is where it is very, very important for us to have understanding. And understanding is very different from the acquiring of fact, according to our author, Mr. Silvano Boruso. And he says, when you acquire facts, you can do that in a very short time and very quickly. But understanding is like a building slowly acquiring its intended shape and function. And it takes time. And when we talk of understanding, we have also to enter into a process. And this process, it means that I have to grow into it. There are things that I cannot understand when I'm 4 years old. I might be told I may have the facts at 4 years old, but maybe I'll be able to understand that only when I'm 20. So this is the importance of understanding. Unfortunately, understanding cannot be taught as knowledge. You can cram knowledge into your head. And as I said, or as Mr. Boruso says, is what most of us did to pass our exams. And sometimes even when we cram these things, they disappear very quickly. Sometimes if you're asked to answer the same questions that you got your A's from, it might be very difficult. And he says that in this book, you will find many examples of understanding. And this is usually from day-to-day levels, and sometimes in areas that you never thought could belong together. And this is how real life is, and how much more exciting than the sense of experience of understanding this. It is so exciting to come to this understanding. And he says, actually, when we are talking about systematic thinking, because this is what the art of thinking is about, because you can think without thinking systematically. Actually, what we are trying to do is to acquire wisdom, or even in other words, the art of ordering factual knowledge and understanding into an enduring intellectual edifice. And he says a good building shows an ordered use of space, a proportional distribution of the masses, no afterthoughts, additions, unnecessary openings, and things like that. So when we are thinking, we have to make sure that we try to look at all the pros, the cons, to try to take the time. Of course, we are not to take forever because we cannot acquire all the knowledge at a go. But this order also that we are pursuing is not just any order, because there will be many suggestions in the journey of life how we should conduct ourselves, we should conduct life. And sometimes some systems of thinking are not correct. So he says, if we are pursuing order and we are pursuing wisdom in systematic thinking, this should be in line with what he calls the universal cosmos, how the world is ordered. And actually what happens is that he says, according to what the scholars tell us, is that our mind tries to reproduce the universe within itself. We are so created in harmony with the universe itself that somehow we try to rebuild that world within themselves. So somehow nature is able to tell us when we are in the right track and when we are not on the right track. And he says, of course, that this book is divided into 3 parts. The first part actually deals with what we call factual knowledge. The second part deals with understanding. And the last, wisdom. And he says that he does not deal with all the rules of logic. As he said, he doesn't want to reduce this into a scholarly book. but he gives some insights on logic so that they can arouse our interest, our curiosity. And if somebody wants to read that, of course, there are other books that deal at length with the whole area of logic. So this is the book that we are looking at today. The Art of Thinking, remember, is one of the faculties that God has given us as human beings, and maybe one of the faculties that also separates us from other creatures. And it is very important for us to appreciate this gift, first of all, as a gift from God, but also appreciate this gift by using it in the best way possible. So let's take a break as we continue to review the book, The Art of Thinking, Charts on Logic by Mr. Silvano Boruso. You are listening to the Power of Reading program here at Radio Maria Nairobi, a Christian voice in your home. I am your host and presenter, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul, and today we are dealing with our mind. We are dealing with our intellect as we review the book, The Art of Thinking, Charts on Logic by Mr. Silvano Boruso. Let's look at the first part of this book, the part one, which deals with what we call the factual knowledge. And he calls this factual knowledge the raw materials of our thinking. And he says that there are only three ways of acquiring factual knowledge. First of all, by the evidence of our senses. I can see a tree, so my senses tell me that what I'm seeing is a tree. I can smell good food being cooked, so my sense of smelling tells us that there is food being cooked. And of course, by proof also, we can prove things. If somebody tells us something has sodium or salt in it, now we have ways of checking even the levels of that. And of course, by testimony. Some of us have never been to Niagara Falls, but we know it exists because the people who live near Niagara Falls have told us that there is that falls. We have a picture and we know that it is really there, and that testimony can be verified. If somebody really doubted, they can go there and find that actually there is a falls called Niagara Falls somewhere between Canada and the United States of America. Or if you are told there is something like a Congo River or Zambezi River, you may not have seen it. It's a testimony from somebody else, but it's something that helps you to acquire knowledge, and also that you can be able to, it's factual knowledge. You don't need to be a prophet to understand that. And he says that when we look at these three pathways of acquiring what we call factual knowledge, he says that the first and the third, the first being evidence of our senses and testimony, provide what he calls factual knowledge. But the second, the proof, provides what he calls digested knowledge, because this requires the understanding of chemical analysis. And this part on raw materials, when you talk about raw materials and checking things, he says in this book you'll not deal with that part of knowledge. He mentions it, but he says that he is not going to deal with that because it's not important for us in learning how to use our faculty of thinking. In chapter 1, he deals with what he calls the observation, what we observe. And he says wherever there is a functioning eye, there is vision, but not necessarily observation. So again, when we are using our senses, he says we have to go a step further. We don't just use our senses in an innate manner. In fact, sometimes we have our eyes open, but we don't see. So he says we can see without observing, and the difference is in how much attention the mind gives to what the eyes see. Because remember, our mind can wander. Even when we are listening, sometimes, especially sometimes when you are listening to some homilies, when they are too long, you reach a point where you switch off without even realizing that you are not present to what the person is saying. So that he says that what creates the difference between seeing and observing is how much our mind is giving attention to what we are seeing. And he gives a very interesting example, which actually I went even to check. He says that most of us drink soft drinks, what we call soda. And we handle the bottle top of the soda hundreds of times. And we know that this bottle top of the soda is crimped. It has like some rough edges there so that it can be able to grip to the neck of the bottle. Then he says, can you ask yourself, how many crimps does it have? How many of those two rough edges does it have? Of course, most of us cannot answer that because we never looked at it, but probably there is somebody who did not only see but observed and even out of curiosity decided to count how many these are. And he says actually they are 21. But he says that example is simplistic, is trifling, but it shows the difference between seeing and observing. And he says we can do the same with the football. Most of us like football. How many polygons and hexagons are there on a football? Actually, they are also quite standard. So he says that the art of observation is also part of the art of thinking. It's a foundation to the art of thinking. So he says when we go to school, many times we are taught to see, we are even taught what to see, but we are not taught how to observe. And actually this applies in every sphere of life, including even our prayer life, even our faith life. When we talk about helping people to know God, actually we teach them how to find God. Then they are supposed to make that journey. And that's why we talk about discipleship. Because if I am the one to tell you how you should believe in God and what you should do all the time, of course there are guidelines, then you will not be making your journey. You'll be making the journey of the person who is guiding you. So he says this is very, very important. And he says that actually even this observation, we can use it in these what we call physical things. Maybe look at a bottle top, observe a football, and even do the counting or any other thing in life that we encounter every day. But at the same time, he says also this observation should also be done on ourselves. And he says, can you recall the first time you observed yourself? For the first time, your thinking was independent of that of your parents. When we are young, the way we are created, before we reach the age where we are able to stand on our own, we are always guided. We don't see ourselves outside our parents or those who are caring for us, our caregivers or our teachers. Then you reach a point where you are able to observe yourself. And this observation can continue through life. How do I react to certain situations? And that's why sometimes you are encouraged even to sit alone, at least sometime during the day, and observe yourself. How do I look at life? What do I do with my money? What happens to my mind? How do I take my decisions? Do I just go with the crowd? And this is something that we cannot delegate to anyone. I have to do that for myself. So when we are observing, of course, we do observe things out there, but the author of this book, The Art of Thinking, says also we observe ourselves. Of course, we are not going to be obsessed with ourselves, but we also observe ourselves. Why do I get angry? Or even when something happens and you see your reaction, whatever the reaction is, how do I react? Even in areas of showing sympathy, of showing compassion to other people, it's good to observe ourselves, because if we just go with the crowd, it might be very difficult for us to be able to grow, not just in our spiritual life, but even in our own intellectual life, not in terms of acquiring degrees and other academic qualifications, but also in acquiring a kind of maturity in our way of analyzing, understanding, and even looking at things with much wisdom. Of course, chapter 2, which is still part of the factual facts, is about testimony. You find that here also he deals with the whole area of testimony. And remember, even he says that we start our journey of life by listening to our parents. Of course, then we move on to teachers and acquaintances, relatives, friends, and of course also reading books in and out of school. And actually, because of this interaction, we have acquired an impressive array of factual knowledge, and most of it never experienced personally. So we don't have to experience everything personally for us to have this knowledge, because their testimony, the testimony of the people we encounter, either physically or through what is written or what maybe we watch, gives us a lot of knowledge. And of course, we have to accept that as human beings, we cannot have every experience that is there in the world today. And there are things, even through this testimony, we can never go back and see. We have to rely on other people's testimony. And this especially in areas of things like history. When we deal with historical matters, most of the time we rely on the testimony of those who kept that history. For example, you're told there were people like Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, maybe even Jomo Kenyatta, great people who lived, but we never saw them, so we rely on the history. And we realize that this testimony is also important. But again, when we are looking at these testimony that we get from historians, from scientists, from any person who presents this testimony, we also have to understand their testimony is connected to something called the truth. And the truth, according to our author, he says that the truth does not belong to anyone. The truth is the truth, no matter who is talking about it. And if the truth changes, there are two truths, then it means that more investigation needs to be done, because the truth is always one. So he says that this is very important, and of course he gives us a lot of examples or people who have spoken different things and done different things to show us how much truth is very important in terms of understanding also the testimonies that people are giving. So also myself, when I am to present a testimony about an issue, I have to be consistent in my truth, because if the truth is not there, then whatever I've presented then becomes an untruth, a false, or a fallacy. So these are the things that our author is talking about. And actually, unfortunately, this is something that also happens today, especially when sometimes people need to do things which will favor them. Sometimes they bargain with the truth, but with time that can happen, that everything falls apart because the truth is not in it. So he says also, when we are looking at the area of testimony, the truth is of great importance. And of course, he also deals with the whole area of missing facts. When we are talking about giving facts as a type of testimony, especially when we do these studies, the sampling of things, it's very important that we try to make sure that when we do not have all the facts, we have to be very clear that we have a sample of what could be a complete picture. And that is why many times when you have some statistical analysis. They'll always tell you the number of people who are contacted so that we're able to know at what proportion is this information being presented to us. And it's very important also to understand that sometimes truth can be used to condemn other people. And it is very dangerous when we think that we know the truth and we can use it against other people. And they say sometimes, even within the church, we have had situations where that some people have the truth and then you realize that you can hurt people without truly understanding what is happening in the life of these people or what is really the truth. Some years down the line, you realize actually you did not have the truth. For example, somebody presents a testimony that the earth is round, and for many years everybody thought, not that they had a fact, they thought that the earth is flat. And they say, no, actually it's not the sun that goes around the earth, it's the earth that goes around the sun. And those kind of things can create some disagreements because it's not easy for everyone to verify that fact, that truth. And sometimes people can be quick to protect what they already know and refuse to be open to the new understanding. So this is also very, very important. Actually, the art of thinking is like being called to become seriously disciplined in the way we acquire knowledge, in the way we use it, in the way we present it to other people, in the way we use it in making decisions, whether against or for people. We have to be very careful and sure that we know what we are looking at and what we want. In chapter 5, he presents to us understanding oneself. And he says, actually, this is part of growing in our art of thinking. Our art of thinking has no sense, has no meaning if I do not understand myself. There is no use of understanding all the things in the world, counting how many grooves the bottle top has. No, that is not enough. We need to understand who we are. He says that while in school, no formal classes gave you any idea that knowledge of self is the most important of all. So our aim, besides acquiring the wisdom, is also self-knowledge. And he says knowledge of self, of course, is a way of speaking. In reality, what is lacking is not knowledge, but actually understanding. When we talk about self-knowledge, actually he says we can change it into what we call self-understanding and the ability to relate one's whole being to the rest of the universe. And he says, as St. Augustine writes in his early work, De Ordine, self-knowledge is the result of inner unity. And he compares human nature to a cycle. Unity for him means to be in the center from which every point of the circumference is equal. The farther from the center one wanders towards the circumference, the less united you are as a person. That is to be centered. He also talks about maturity, and he says that maturity does not come without also proper systematic thinking. And he talks about the difference between self-knowledge and imitation. Let us not confuse self-knowledge and imitation. And he talks about many other areas of life that are important for us to be able to understand ourselves, our relationships, how we relate with other people. So there is so much that we can say about this book, The Art of Thinking, Charts on Logic by Mr. Silvano Boruso. Of course, we may not be able to do everything. In fact, I also wanted to say something about wisdom, but I'm sure, dear listener, you should be able to get a copy of this book, The Art of Thinking, Charts on Logic, so that we can grow in our faculty of understanding. Actually, it says our thinking needs understanding, but not just a superficial understanding, an understanding that is based on teaching ourselves, helping ourselves in our area of thinking, being observant, understanding how to acquire knowledge and how to distinguish the truth, to understand the truth through our intellect, to understand that what we think has to be coherent, it has not to be opposing to any other truth that is found in the universe. So thank you, dear listener, for being with us today in our program, The Power of Reading. I really welcome you to get a copy of this book, The Art of Thinking. You can get it from any of the Pauline's books and media bookshops. wherever you are around the world, here in Kenya or in any African country. If you don't want to do that, or in your place you don't have Pauline's Bookshop, you can visit our website page, www.paulinesafrica.org, and you can be able to buy these books also online. So thank you very much, and I also thank Mr. Timothy Moreithi, who has recorded this program for us here at Pauline's Studio, Nairobi. So until next week, thank you very much. Let us continue growing in our reading culture. I have been your host and presenter, Sister Beatrice from the Daughters of St. Paul.
You have been listening to the Power of Reading program. Join us next week as we continue discovering the wonderful world of books. This program is prepared for Radio Maria Nairobi and presented to you by the Daughters of St. Paul.